All right, I guess we'll give everybody another minute. Hope people didn't get thrown off by the 8:15 versus 8 o'clock start time.
I think it was pretty clear.
I think so.
You said 8:15.
All right, well, we'll get started. Okay.
Can you explain the whole program for the night?
Yes. So we are partnering with Yeshiva University, who is partnering with 50 shuls from around the country. And the idea is that after you log on with your local rabbi, then you tune in to the rest of the Yeshiva University staff presentations. So you'll see on the flyer their website and the other links where you can tune into their lecturers and their rabbis and teachers. So that's the basic gist of it.
It won't be on this link?
It won't be on this link. You have to refer back to the flyer.
Okay.
Okay, so there is a very interesting idea of fixing the mistakes of previous generations in what almost seems to be a tangible way. So when it comes to Shavuot, the tradition is based on the Mishnah Berurah, based on the Magen Avraham, that hold on a second here. That the Jewish people slept a regular night's sleep the night before the most important day in the history of the world, the giving of the Torah. And so we're told that we are required to fix their egregious mistake. They should have been somewhat excited. They should have been kind of had a fitful and difficult night's sleep based on their excitement. So we're supposed to fix what they do by staying up late the first night of Shavuot ourselves, making up every single year during subsequent Shavuot observances to make up for what for their failure to show sufficient excitement for the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. And what you and I are going to do tonight is, I think, we're going to do what we can to study in place of action or in place of prayer, even on some level. There's a tradition that if you cannot actually bring a sacrifice, we can't bring a korban today's day and age, that you can read the passages, and that is the equivalent to the sacrifices. So it is our opportunity, this is what we have at our disposal, to try to talk about making a tikkun, fixing that which we can fix, and talking about the institution that is Tikkun Leil Chatzos, which is a different tikkun than Tikkun Leil Shavuos. That was an error of the generation of the Midbar, those who wandered the desert and those who received the Torah. This mistake, talking about the institution of Tikkun Leil Chatzos, is the opportunity to try to fix the Jewish people's lack of appreciation, a mistake that they made when the destruction of Jerusalem took place. But every generation has an obligation to do what they can to be worthy of a rebuilt Jerusalem. So every generation, we're trying to fix their lack of appreciation and excitement for having the Beis HaMikdash. So my colleague, Rabbi Schaffer challenged me to do a class on this topic, in part because, generally speaking, the exercise and the institution of Tikkun Leil Chatzos, which is getting up in the middle of the night and saying a prayer to express one's appreciation and one's mourning of not having the Beis Hamikdash. Hello, Binstocks. So it is our opportunity and privilege to try to fix those previous generations not appreciating Jerusalem enough. So there are other behaviors or actions that we try to do in order to try to fix.
There's only three
others. So we try to fix the mistakes of, let's say, Lashon Hara that was done in previous generations. We try to fix mistakes of not appreciating Israel enough. But this is a very formal exercise. Tikkun Leil Chatzos, literally the midnight, halachic midnight, looking at sunrise and nightfall. And you have a midday point, we'll talk about that, and a midnight point, and saying the prayers that have to do with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and expressing our appreciation for that. Now, Shavuot as a whole, the night learning on Shavuot is generally a free-for-all in the sense of topics that are chosen. Whatever keeps people awake seems to be what's chosen. So you'll notice that this topic that I chose doesn't have anything directly to do with Shavuos, although I just explained one connection, fixing the mistake of the generation that received the Torah not being excited enough and sleeping through, and so therefore we should stay up in the middle of the night. But also we should get up in the middle of the night now to fix as well. So to fix the mistake of not appreciating the Beis Hamikdash. But essentially this topic has really nothing to do with Shavuos. I'll make some connections, but it's just a general topic, and people should be aware. Hello, Bill. People should be aware that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people that get up at midnight to say these prayers, Tikkun Leil Chatzos, and to express their bereavement, their mourning, and their desire to have the Beis Hamikdash once again. So, how does it work rationally to be able to fix the mistakes of others in previous generations? People who committed those mistakes, it's their fault. People who, hi Mayor, people who went ahead and they committed a crime, so there's a punishment for that crime. How can we fix other people? How does that make any sense? The answer is that the Jewish people are...
James.
Hi, Michelle. The Jewish people are different in that our souls and our physical beings are not finite, and we're all interconnected in some way. And if our ancestors made a mistake, then no doubt there's something within our persona which is connected to them, and the mistakes are somehow passed down to us as well. So there certainly is a real opportunity for us to fix that which needs to be fixed. And that's part of the idea of Tikkun Chatzos. Again, Tikkun means fixing, Chatzos means midnight, and in this case we mean fixing the brokenness, if you will, of the Mikdash, of the temple being destroyed. So what's fascinating is there's something special about the nighttime. There's something that can be accomplished at night that can't be accomplished during other times of the day. And there must be something, we'll speak to this specifically, about midnight. The night is broken up into three different segments. That's what the Talmud describes to us. In fact, we know this because there are three different shifts of the Kohanim who presided over the temple, which was a 24/7 operation. And we're told that Torah study at night is more valuable and you retain more of the knowledge or information. There's something special about the night. What's the original source for this? The original source for this comes from Jeremiah, comes from the prophet Yirmiyahu, comes from Eicha, Lamentations. And there in the book of Eicha, it says, Kumi Roni Balayla. You get up at night, Barosh Ashmores. Ashmores refers to one of the three divisions of the night. And at the beginning of that time, Shivchi Kamayim Libech, he says, I pour out my soul like water, and my prayer is very fervent. That's what it means. Nochach Panei Hashem, I encounter the Almighty. My prayer is befitting of the King. And there's nothing greater in Judaism than when you see the words Lifnei Hashem. Yom Kippur is Lifnei Hashem. Being on the Temple Mount is Lifnei Hashem, being before God. That's like the holiest, whether you're talking about realm of time or space. So when the prophet says this, Nochach Panei Hashem, it's exceedingly powerful. And if you look at the original Babylonian translation, going back thousands of years, to the original diaspora Jewish community, where they took the words of the prophet Yirmiyahu and they translated it into the vernacular for the Babylonian community, you see that they understood. And remember, they're not that far away from when Yirmiyahu was actually alive. And so it's what we see from that original translation, and we have it. We have the translation they used in the Jewish community in Bavel and Babylonia. You see that they understand that the prophet is talking about the Beis HaMikdash, because you wouldn't know that based on the context. But more than that is that there is Rosh Hashmoros Balayla, that at nighttime is the time to think about what we're missing by being exiled and not having the Beis HaMikdash, not having that center, that spiritual headquarters. And so there is a certain crying out that's listened to by the Almighty at night, unlike any other time. And I'll give an example of that in a moment. But the Gemara says that in the middle of the night, whatever this means, it's very hard to understand, but it's an agadata, which means that it's more of a story found in the Talmud as opposed to halachic. But the Gemara proves that God himself, in the middle of the night, cries out, "Oily, woe is to me," says God, "Shebavonosehem hecharavti," that the sins of the Jews forced me to destroy my home, the Beis HaMikdash, the place where I reside, the Sarafti, and I had to burn it to the ground, the Higlesi, and I had to exile them out among the nations of the world. And God is upset about this, but the way that he says it, we forced his hand, but he still, in a sense, has regrets. Very hard to understand that. But the point is that this happens in the middle of the night. We want to tap into that power and to connect with the Almighty accordingly. And that's part of the institution of learning about, but even reciting for the many, many, many hundreds of people that recite this at midnight. Now, Rabbeinu Asher, everybody should Google who Rabbeinu Asher is from the Middle Ages, one of the top 5 most important commentaries from the Middle Ages, says, we need to look at this passage. And it might be hard for us to wrap our heads around God saying, woe is me, and regretting his decision, essentially, taking away our divine providence that resulted in the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And he says, Roy l'chol yirei shamayim. It's fitting for all who have a fear of heaven, meaning people who are religionists, people who have an awareness of God. Sheyehei meitzar v'doeg, that they pain themselves and that they worry about what will become of the world and about what has happened, what has transpired since the Beis HaMikdash is no longer around, and we are bereft, and we are essentially been orphaned by the fact that we've been spread all over the world and we no longer have this parent in heaven, so to speak, with this close connection that we had when the Beis Hamikdash was around and when the temple was there for us to be able to do more mitzvahs, but also to have a real service and a real connection to God and to be able to even witness miracles. Now, I think that we'll all be able to better understand now, thinking about the importance of the time period of midnight. The most famous thing that ever happened at midnight was Kachatzos Halayla, or Bachatzos Halayla, in Exodus, in Shmos. What am I referring to? The 10th and final plague, the last of the Makos. We are told that at midnight, meaning whenever sunrise was, whenever nightfall was, at midnight, God struck the firstborn. And that's something which is an explicit source, and it's something which underscores the general principle, which is there is an Eis Ratzon. There is a time of God's will being ready to hear our supplications and our prayers. It is a desirable time to look to God to make requests, achatzos. And when it comes to national and critical requests, such as having an intact Jerusalem and spiritual headquarters, there's no better time to cry out to God than chatzos, than this midnight. And the Tosfos Yantif, a 1700s commentator on the Mishnah and a prolific author and leading rabbi and scholar, said, look, it doesn't matter how much you say. Say what you can. You want to say a lot? Say a lot. And this is codified in Jewish law. Say a little, say a little. But he says if you have the ability to be there at midnight, so to speak, and we'll see it gets extended from there, and to cry out to God on behalf of the Jewish people nationally, to bring in all the Jews together to a rebuilt Jerusalem, then doesn't matter how much you say, but make sure you're involved in it. Make sure your heart is attuned accordingly. So there are different opinions. Is it right before Chatzos that you start, right before midnight? Is it at midnight itself? So at the very least, the most lenient opinion is that it's before dawn. Anytime during the course of the night, try to take a few minutes to do this. And this is, in fact, codified in the Code of Jewish Law, in the Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the most important work for what Judaism looks like today can be found in the Shulchan Aruch. He puts us at the very beginning of the entire book. What does he say, number one? He says, rise up like a lion and serve your Creator, say thank you. But right after that, he says all God-fearing people need to pray on behalf of a rebuilt Jerusalem, and he puts that at the very beginning. And at the end of the service of this Tikkun Chatzos, and you can find it online, I'm happy to send it to you, the liturgy that's there. What's said is an ani mamin. Ani mamin meaning an affirmation of belief. 13 ani mamins, as we say in the vernacular. We believe, and people conclude the service, this Tikkun Chatzos service, by saying, B'nechamas Zion, with the comforting of Zion. And that's the idea. We seek a time of a complete and whole Zion, Yerushalayim. So they go on to explain some of the particulars, Akira, some of the particulars where if you get together in groups, and the reason why I'm sharing this is because most people in our shul don't know this exists. The fact that there are people around the world getting up at midnight to say this prayer service, relatively obscure, relatively esoteric, where there's a pretty explicit reference right at the beginning of Rabbi Joseph Caro's famous work, the Shulchan Aruch. And there are those who say that people would get together in groups. And the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, the main commentary over the last 100 years on the Shulchan Aruch. So he explains that even though it could be very late at night, obviously midnight can be very late at night, and I've seen this take place at the Kotel, but even in residential areas, and it can even disturb those, so you have to try to be respectful of your neighbors. But he says not to dissuade those who want to say this service, Tikkun Leil Chatzos, in the middle of the night, not to dissuade them from getting together in groups, because there's a real power in collective prayer, which is why we're all yearning, hopefully when it's safe, to get back together again. But there's real power in collective prayer, and even though it's a strange time to get together at midnight at Chatzos, if people decide to get together, they should go ahead and do so, and they shouldn't be discouraged from doing so. And if they even want to walk to shul and open up the shul, because the shul is a greater level of holiness, obviously, than other buildings, so then it's more likely to be accepted. So number one, he says to say this service, the Tikkun service, reflecting on the temple and asking for a rebuilt Jerusalem at midnight. Number two, he's suggesting, if you can, based on where you are in life, get together with your friends and do it with them, if you are able to. And number three, if you can get together in your shul and you can get the shul to be open for you, that's even better. So if somebody really wanted to be strict about this, those would be the steps to follow. Then he gives the caveat, because you're all wondering, and I wondered the same thing. How come nobody does this? How come very few people I know, I can't think of anybody in my immediate circles, who gets up at midnight, myself included, unfortunately. In my mind, I always thought that I'd be able to do this, but these plans of piety never came to fruition. But why is it that very few people say this prayer service in the middle of the night? And the answer is, I think, because of what Rabbi Kagan says in the Mishnah Berurah. He says, if you find that your sleep is necessary, if you find that getting up in the middle of the night will negatively impact you and your ability to function and your health due to your weakened state. And by the way, there's a fascinating separate class about how we're actually weaker in our constitution in many ways than some previous generations, which is a fascinating topic. But if our health is such, then you don't have to do it. Now, again, even though we said that all of the lawmakers, the rabbinic authorities, etc., suggested doing it, nobody ever said obligation. They just said all God-fearing people should say this liturgy. But it's very important to be attuned to trigger words within Jewish law. The word chayav, the word obligation, is very powerful. If you don't see that word connected to whatever tradition we're talking about, it's not an absolute obligation. It might very well be suggested, but you have permission, kind of opt in and opt out. But it's a very dramatic expression to say all God-fearing people should say this prayer service. So, but what's fascinating is, and what I'm sharing with you is the reason why you and I haven't heard about this prayer service as much or are familiar with other people saying it, is because I think that the Mishnah Berurah gives an out. If you're not, if you need the sleep, you don't have to do it. But I think that people should look back at the original source, because at the very end of the paragraph, what I'm sharing with you now, he says, anyways, you need to get up this is what he says, which is hard for us to really fathom. But he says, everybody obviously has to get up a half an hour or an hour before davening time or before sunrise, he says, which is funny the way we think about it. And then it's the middle of the night. And what I presume he's saying is, and this is my own idea, but what I presume he's saying between the lines is, look, it's still nighttime. Take a few minutes to think about Jerusalem, to think about attuning your heart and mind to praying for a rebuilt Jerusalem and a return of the Beis HaMikdash, etc. So that's what I think he's really saying. Now, we might not be familiar with it in America, but in Israel, it's extremely popular. In America, it's somewhat popular. There is a common practice to get up to daven with sunrise, to say the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, at sunrise. That's more popular, which he's making reference to over here. So that's more popular, but saying this liturgy is not as popular as it should be, in my opinion. I have been getting up since the coronavirus started to say the Amidah with the sunrise every morning, since we're not having services. That's the next best thing to do. And that's what I think he's referencing here in this section that I'm quoting to you. But there are other sources that say, look, not taking advantage of the enormous potential of prayer at midnight, according to some opinions, is punishable. Remember, I said the plague of the firstborn happened at midnight. And there's a certain power to midnight. And whatever this means, this Talmudic passage that God laments the destruction of the temple at midnight. So those who fail to tap into it, according to some, it's really reprehensible on some level. In fact, other sources say that this is the whole reason night was created, to be able to find the ideal time for supplication and request, and to be able to not necessarily encounter God like we do on Yom Kippur, but in some sort of small way of a 24-hour cycle. This is the most, we don't understand it rationally, but there are certain times of the day that are more powerful for prayer than other times of the day. And this is the time, this halakhic midnight. And that's the reason night was created, to be able to focus our minds on such things. And Maimonides says, use it for Torah study. We're saying here, use it for prayer. Certainly everybody would say, use it for both. Now, one of the powers of studying and praying during the nighttime, and again, I'm a rationalist. It's hard for me to understand this rationally. That they say that one of the rewards of doing this and taking advantage of the nighttime opportunity that exists is protection from physical harm, specifically from fires. Now, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, and I think what it means is, from a rational perspective, is that, look, the more mindful you are, the more conscientious you are, the more thoughtful you are, and that really is something that happens necessarily with Torah study and with prayer. So the less likely you are to make mistakes, the less likely you are for an accident to happen, for God forbid, as it says here, a conflagration. So now that's an interesting related quote and source related to our topic. And the last source specifically to this, page 60b in the tractate Baba Basra in the Talmud, the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, has a gloss, and he has a commentary where he says, look, when Rabbi Yosef Karo says at the beginning of section 1 of the most important work we have with regards to Jewish law, his Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says what Rav Yosef Karo is referring to when he says that all of those who are God-fearing should take time out of the night for this kind of reflection. He says this is just the practical action that comes from the following teaching, which is Kol HaMizabel, anybody who mourns the destruction of the temple will merit to see it be rebuilt. That is in a lesson or an axiom from the Gemara. And relatedly, we're told as well, Imash kachech, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, cut off my right hand. The reason why Rabbi Karo writes what he writes is because of these very powerful traditions that we always have to remember Jerusalem, and that if we mourn for its destruction, we will merit to see someday, hopefully soon, the rebuilt Jerusalem. Okay, so I just want to reflect now on the remaining time here, and then we can open it up for questions or conversation, etc. But what is the importance of what we're missing? What many of us might not end up saying the liturgy. So as I suggested in the beginning, learning about the practice, is helpful in lieu of actually following through on the practice. But all of us can use our minds to think about the loss that is. And I'm going to just share some ideas as an exercise in helping us think through what we're missing by not having a rebuilt Jerusalem. I would say first and foremost is unity. Imagine 3 times a year, imagine going up to Jerusalem and being there with representatives of every single Jewish family in the world. And that is a mighty powerful experience. And it's very much related to Shavuot because we have reason to believe that God would not have given us the Torah, the most important transaction ever, if we were not unified at the time. And if you look carefully in the Torah, it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael. And it says that there the Jewish people encamped in the wilderness of the Sinai near the Mount of Sinai. And if you look at every place in the Torah where it says the Jewish people camped, and remember, they camped many places, it was 40 years. It says Vayachanu in the plural, as it should, because we're talking about a nation, so it should say in the plural. And everybody says it's intentional. Why is it written in the singular, Vayichan, instead of Vayachanu? Because we were so unified, and that was a prerequisite for getting the Torah, that the experience of getting the Torah showed a certain singularity of purpose and of being on a national and collective level. And so the Beis HaMikdash had that same ability, and what we're missing is the unity. And it is appropriate, even though to some extent the topic we chose is a little bit disconnected from Shavuot, there's a strong connection as well. The second idea I want to put into your head, if you have time to think about the temple during the nighttime and the loss that we continue to experience, is clarity. If you look in Ethics of Our Fathers, you'll see, I think it's chapter 5, reference after reference after reference of miracles, small miracles, that took place in and around the temple during the temple's everyday goings on and regular kind of living in and around the temple. And so there's a certain clarity that comes with the Beis HaMikdash. First of all, so much of the Torah is confusing for you and for me because it's not relevant anymore, because we don't have an intact Jerusalem, because we're diaspora spread all over the world. So it's very confusing. And perhaps what we lament the most by not having a whole Jerusalem is clarity of thought, clarity of experience, clarity of religion, clarity within Torah living. Number 3, I would say, is that with a Beis HaMikdash, like at Har Sinai, Beis HaMikdash was the house of God. And there's no doubt the revelation on Har Sinai was essentially for the temporary time a presence of God, and that we experience that, whatever that might mean. But it's hard for us. We're so distracted and we're so all over the place geographically. It's hard for us to encounter God. With the rebuilt Jerusalem, if we could experience that and think about that during Tikkun Leil Chatzos, encountering God, and it's very much connected to Shavuot, something that can be had with a fully intact Jerusalem. Besides that, we talked about it before, is what can be gained by having a temple, is mindfulness. Is that if you realize they're geographically, I went up to the Temple Mount twice in recent years, and with the encouragement of Rabbi Chait, and I had to go to the mikvah. I had to follow very, very significant rules because of the holiness that's on the Temple Mount, requires many more traditions to be followed. And there's a certain mindfulness that comes with that. If you look at the system of mitzvos, and I'm saying this kind of parenthetically, the mitzvos will create a mindfulness. The mitzvahs do create a mindfulness. They create a certain intentionality. And it's very powerful to live within the mitzvah system because of that. We can't eat anything we want to eat. We can't do anything we want to do. And it's very powerful. And there's a certain mindfulness that we're lacking without the added parts of Judaism that would come with the Beis Hamikdash. Additionally, I would say world leadership. You look at our high point, or you think of King Solomon, you think about our history that everybody from around the world came to King Solomon for wisdom and came to Jerusalem for wisdom because, and even I would say there's a great residual effect there today. The people there are extremely learned on average, even within Israel. And there's a certain leadership that can be had with a unified and healthy Yerushalayim with the Beis Hamikdash. So I would say additionally to think in your mind at night about how it can help us clinch our destiny as a people and to live the way that God intended us to live. And it's Torah in its ideal state can only be had with a certain kind of presence in Jerusalem. And that's something else to think about. And I would say this is pretty amazing. I thought about it today in preparing for the class. You even can surpass the Sinai experience by having a rebuilt Jerusalem and Beis Hamikdash. Look, in Jewish tradition, the area of Sinai, despite the video, Esther, that you sent me, the Sinai area does not get a lot of focus within Judaism. The revelation happened, it occurred, we moved on. But our focus is Israel, which is pretty amazing because the revelation happened in the desert. But our focus is Jerusalem. So Torah in its ideal state, being lived the way it's meant to be lived, being seen and practiced the way it's supposed to be practiced and understood accordingly, because practice leads to understanding. You and I are so far behind in our comprehension because so much what we do is just in the abstract and it's so hard to relate to. And we do the best we can. And of course, there's a lot that's not just conceptual. There's a lot that's practical, but it would be, much, much more practical, and we would feel the relevance much more strongly. I would also say this, and this I'm saying, putting my my hat on as a past professional within the mental health world, and my master's in mental health counseling and those jobs I had a long time ago, is that an intact Jerusalem, for a lot of the reasons that we just mentioned, but would also lead to a great avoidance of pain. The clarity of thought leads to an avoidance of pain. A lot of times, myself included, there's our wounds are oftentimes self-inflicted, and it has to do with our confusion. I think that's a fact based on what I've seen. It's certainly true for myself. And there's a tradition which is very hard to understand, but the Medrash says that at Har Sinai, everyone became healed. And the Medrash says, now look, all this back-breaking labor, they had so many bruises, and they had so many broken bones, and they had the slavery for so long. But the way the Medrash goes, whatever this means, the Malachim, the angels, said, God, how could the Torah be given and we not provide the healing in a sense that comes along with it? That's what the Medrash says. I'm happy to show you the specific words inside because I'm not quoting it exactly. But there's a healing that comes along with the Torah with our Sinai. And with the increased Torah that would exist with the Beis Hamikdash, there would be healing. I would posit mentally and physically. To me, mental well-being and physical well-being are parallel. They're right next to each other. They're equally important. And certainly I think it's referring to both. in addition, I would say just the families, family units would be in a better state. More than that, and I think in no particular order, is the land of Israel itself. That if you have an anchor, if you have a base, if you have a this very strong and fully intact central authority that is Jerusalem, and that was the base of Mikdash, and that needs to be that again. So we'll have we should think about that in the middle of the night at Chatzos, thinking about what we're missing, what we're lacking. All right, so that concludes the lecture. I'm going to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, so everybody can say hi to each other. Wish everybody a good Yontif. We'll see if anybody has any questions or any thoughts they wanted to share. So, all right. Any questions? Any thoughts, anybody?
I have a question about why is it this night? It's not Shavuot yet.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, what we talked about in terms of Tikkun Leil Chatzos, thank you if it wasn't clear, that's really every night. Every night God says in the Talmud, woe is me that I destroyed my temple, that I kicked out my people from the land of Israel. Every night has that midnight when, when the last plague happened. Every night has that power, that potency to it. Now, what we explained in the beginning was on Shavuos, it's called Tikkun, and I wanted to talk about this other exercise that people don't know about called Tikkun. The Tikkun that we spoke about is every day, or every night, I should say. The Tikkun that we do once a year, the fixing, is fixing again the generation that received the Torah, who didn't show enough excitement, and they slept as if it was a regular night, and we try to fix that by staying up at night and having an institution where we all learn together late into the evening, if not the entire night. So there's another fixing, and that is the fixing of the Beis HaMikdash, which is Tikkun Leil Chatzos, and it's really every single night. Now, you and I are learning tonight something special, something I don't usually do, because we can't get together in person this Yom Tov. And that's why 50 shuls and Yeshiva University are putting together this program. So, all right. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
Rabbi Asher?
Yes.
Just to clarify, so you're saying it with Tikkun, you said Tikkun Chatzos?
Yes, it's called Tikkun Leil Chatzos.
Lechatzos?
Chatzos, Tikkun Leil Chatzos. Tikkun means fix, Leil means night, Chatzos means midnight.
Oh, Tikkun Chatzos or Tikkun Lechatzos.
Leil Chatzos means nighttime. Chatzos could mean midday, it could be midnight, so we call it Leil Chatzos, like Lila.
Okay, so is that supposed to be part of Mari, or that's its own separate entity?
No, because it's supposed to be done at midnight. Now, like I said, I think you can get away with doing it any time during the night. Probably the best time would be at midnight for sure. Second best time would be right before dawn. But I think everybody should take some time during the night to follow this code of Rav Yosef Karo.
Now, where would you find it?
I'm saying people don't know about it. Something different than Marav, something we should think about or at least be aware of.
But where would you find it? I've never seen it. I'm saying
it's in some Sidurim, and I'm happy to send it to you. Okay.
Why not Thursday night?
Well, I'm saying every night, it's funny. Craig's point is very important because the liturgy is very different. According to most opinions, I think you don't say it on Yontif and Shabbos. You say it every night that's not Yontif and Shabbos. So, okay. Because again, there's something morning destructive about it. Yes, Esther.
No, Mayor, come back.
Yeah, I would just like to wish everybody Chag Shavuot Sameach.
Yes, Chag Sameach, everybody. And we're going to do Marav now. It's nice to see everybody. For those who want to stay for Marav, great. For those who want to move on to the next lecture through Yeshiva University, that's great. Nice to see the Marks kids. And
Rabbi Asher, can you send it to me?
Yes. Is that Michelle speaking?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, okay. All right. Very good. Everybody have a good Yontif, a Chag Sameach.
Okay.
Chag Sameach.
So can I also ask you one quick question?
Yes, Michelle.
Do you have any idea as to when you think KBI will reopen? Because
The
we are in
earliest
phase
would,
one
we
now.
have a meeting on Sunday night. to talk about. So, but
Okay.
I mean, the earliest would be June 12th, but that would be the earliest. That would be the
Okay.
earliest. All right.
Rabbi, did you cancel your sabbatical?
I did not cancel the sabbatical. As of now, we still have flights to Israel for 3 months. So a lot of logistical nightmares involved, but we're doing the best we can.
When
Okay.
is your sabbatical?
Yom
I'm
Tov.
sorry.
June,
What's
July,
your best?
August.
June, July, August. Oh.
All right, everybody, have a great night. And, you know, if you're up in the middle of the night, think about these thoughts. And if you're not up in the middle of the night, then before you go to sleep, think about it. And just be aware of this part of our tradition. So everybody, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Laila Tov.
Lala Tov.
So, okay,
Thank you.
those who are here for Mariv, I'm going to stop the recording now.